Hello everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite, and with me today I'm very honoured to have Nuala Walsh, who's been on all kinds of amazing shows like Breakfast TV in Dublin and stuff, and we're going to be talking about her book, Tune In, Hear What Others Don't, How to Make Smarter Decisions in a Noisy World. Nuala, thank you so much for coming on. Great book, really loved it. I understand the sentiment, and I really want to talk about that today. Where can people find you?
Easiest option, Tim, is LinkedIn, I guess, rather than my website. But I think LinkedIn first, I think, is probably the easiest for people.
Okay. So Nuala, as I said, really loved it. And I think it's a book of now, isn't it? Very much in terms of there is so much noise, and how do we actually focus and actually make the right decisions? What for you was the inspiration, and what was the spark that actually wanted you to actually sit down and actually write this?
Yeah, great question, Tim. Well, I guess after 30 years in business, and a couple of years of studying behavioral science, I basically realized that the biggest risk that we all face is actually controllable. And the biggest risk is human decision risk. And it's something we don't think about because we're so busy. And when companies talk about risk, they tend to talk about economic, political, or even climate risk. Nobody talks about human decision risk. And it is the one risk that has the most catastrophic and avoidable consequences. So I wanted to give people an easy tool, a different way of thinking about the decisions that they make.
And you talk about the whole book, and the premise of it is about being in a noisy world. How do you define noise? Because one person's noise is another person's signal, isn't it?
That's right. And to be honest, noise is kind of two ways. You've got external noise, which is all of the distraction, the disinformation, the data overload that people, face every day. But there's also the internal noise, which is, I guess, the misinformation that we have in our mind. And that really is what the focus of the book is about. It's about why we hear less and we misjudge more. And because it's getting worse, you've got more missed signals, as you say, missed scams, missed cries for help. What people are facing is an inability to really hear what matters most. And when you don't hear what matters most, you miss all of these signals. And there's a great phrase that says, everything valuable that you hear isn't necessarily what you need to hear. So it's sort of a way of thinking about not jumping to conclusions, pausing, not cherry picking data, not rushing to judgment, and not taking information at face value. But the reality is that, under pressure, in uncertainty, when we're hassled or overloaded, that's exactly what we do. And the book tries to point out in so many different domains how that can be avoided and the consequences minimized for people.
Why is it, do you think, that people jump to conclusions, as you say, and why is it, what is it that why is it that people find it so difficult to tune out?
Well, it's because of the noise, for one thing. I think a lot of it is it's the environment we're in, and it's not necessarily our fault. But when you hold power, it is actually your choice whether you try to do something about it. And what's predictable is always preventable. And the smartest thing you can know is who to listen to and who not, who to tune in and who to tune out. And the problem is we jump to the most familiar voice, the most comfortable voice, the most credible voice at times. And it's not necessarily the right voice. So if you only listen to the loudest person in the room or the most senior person in the room, they're not necessarily right. And in many cases, whether it's from Ponzi scheme to 9/11, that has proven to be the case. And so the book tries to focus people's minds onto listening to things just a little bit differently, to reinterpreting the different messages that we hear.
You mentioned in the book 10 judgment traps. And I really like this. I thought it was one of those things we do go online with, with our biases and everything like that. So why is this is this making us unconsciously blind?
Well, you mentioned blind, but actually, as you know from the book, it talks about blind spots, deaf spots, and dumb spots.
Yes.
And what I've tried to do is it's all a different form of the same thing. We tune out what really matters. We have unconscious, biases. And we actually have 200 different biases. And because no one can possibly remember all of those, we're already overloaded. What I've tried to do is to categorize those into 10 different traps. And I summarize it with the word perimeters, and I call them the perimeters traps. Now, perimeters is a mnemonic. On the one hand, it reflects the narrow world, our narrow way of thinking, but the actual words reflect different abstract ideas that you would hear about every day. So power-based traps for P, ego, risk, identity, memory, ethics, time, emotional-based traps, or relationships and story-based traps. Each of those traps have 6 or 7 different underlying biases. Each of those is a source of misinformation, whether you're merging, whether you're hiring, whether you're selling. And the point is that if you at least go to the trouble of understanding some of these, you have an opportunity to reduce error going forward. And you have a better ability to hear dissenting voices and recognize critical warnings or cues or, in some cases, cries for help.
So give us an example.
Well, if you take, I love power-based traps because we all think about power, from and this could be from a business perspective or from a personal perspective. So people either are chasing power, or they have power and they don't lose power, or they've just lost power. So, and what happens is this isn't about power per se, it's about what decisions will you make when you are either chasing power, desperate to hold on to power, or you've just lost power. And on either of those stages, you're liable for risk. So if you take the illusion of invulnerability, if you take the opioid crisis, for example, the boards, the sales teams, all were aware of the consequences of the mis-selling of OxyContin, which basically people oversold the drug and they minimized the risk of addiction. So in that you have the desire to be number one. You've got the salespeople's desire to lead their team. You have everything from, I guess, the illusion of invulnerability to the narrow focus from the Sacklers or from McKinsey to, try and make as much money as they could, quite frankly. McKinsey is a very good example there of they had authority bias. So that is, we listen to the most important person in the room, or the person we think is the most important person. And even in that, you can see the evidence there of how, they had conflict of interest. So again, as part of the power-based traps, they were completely subject to this functional blindness or functional deafness. And, you had, of course, the consequences. And it's not just, the opioid crisis. You see it in your own company, or I was working, people defer to hierarchy, even when their decisions are flawed. And I've worked with plenty of really smart people who don't want to upset the board or the CEO. And all of this is made worse by the halo effect. So, I don't know if you remember Adam Newman from WeWork. A very good example of someone, very power oriented, but scrutinized for his business practices. And, you can even take Donald Trump for January 6th, very current, of course. What did he do when he was threatened with loss of power? You had the January 6th riots. So what decisions do you make when you are either facing a power-based trap, an ego-based trap, a risk-based trap, etc.? And there are 10 of these traps and about 60 or 70 different biases within. But each of them can be related to anything that you read about in the papers, and each of them have a scientific grounding underneath.
Because you would have thought in those, in the opioid or the WeWork situation, you would have thought that somebody there was saying this is wrong.
You're absolutely right. And that enters the dumb spots, actually, when people, if you don't speak up, how do you expect people to hear anything? They don't. Yeah. And so some reasons why people don't speak up when you have complicity is, of course, it's either, self-preservation, they're risk minimizers, they're people pleasers, they've got desire for power themselves, or they believe a story that they've heard. They think, it's been done for the right reasons or whatever. And you saw that in Theranos, if you remember as well. So people become very complicit in the Theranos scandal as well. So all of these can be traced back. And then, of course, you have the very obvious ego-based traps, which I think we probably could spend an hour on, Tim.
Yeah. If you're in a big house and you've got a Lamborghini out the front, and you're on the front cover of magazines and everyone's telling you how wonderful you are, you're going to want to stay. You're probably, if you allowed yourself to get into that position, you're probably going to want to have that as long as you can.
That's exactly right. And that is actually tied very much to the identity-based traps, believe it or not, where you're into impression management and in-group bias versus out-group bias. So you can see these traps aren't standalone. You can see how some of them are more dominant in certain situations than others. So some people are high on identity and some people, but some people aren't. But if you are particularly high ego, really craving and desperate for attention, you're desperate for all of those social media likes. If you are a hostage to that, you actually give up your own power, and you lose power by definition because someone else is controlling your happiness, your satisfaction. If you don't get enough approval or enough likes, and that's a really big issue now, particularly with FOMO and the anxious generation, as it were.
Yeah, I remember a story about a guy. He was the number one person in the world for the witchcraft game, and when he was asked what did he think about it, he said, I'm the unhappiest man in the world.
Isn't that interesting?
And the reason for that was with witchcraft, you build communities and people can come down and burn them down. So to have a shower, he used to have to take 5 iPads into the shower with him to maintain the fact that people weren't sneaking up on him and burning it all down.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, but all of these traps are something that people don't talk about, Tim, and that's one of the problems here, that we make decisions, we think we're making good decisions because we're all overconfident, or most people are overconfident, and 96% of people think they're great listeners anyway. But the reality is that they're not, and by definition, you enter more of these problems, and you don't pay enough attention to understanding human bias and these errors. But by even looking at this framework, it will not only help you make better decisions going forward, but it will also help you explain decisions in the past. And I don't know about you, but it's very frustrating when you see people doing things and you think, well, why did they do that? How did the British Post Office scandal come about? But when you understand these, you can, as I said, you can plot in your company the potential risk of falling into any of these traps, through a particular model that people can use. So, or you can just do it yourself as you're making a decision, even if you just run through the perimeters traps in your head and say, well, am I making this decision to impress the neighbors? Am I following the crowd, which is the relationship-based traps? Am I just listening to whatever my favorite messenger has told me? They're the story-based traps. You actually are able to then dig deep into what can you do about it, and how can you prevent these errors? So it can be really simple, and it can be really in depth as well.
So that brings me on to, how can leaders and managers apply the principle of the book to improve team dynamics and decision making in their organizations?
Yeah, and I would say, Tim, that it's not specifically for team dynamics. It can be, but if you get the individual right, by definition, you could probably help with the team. The last third of the book is all about the strategies of what people can do, and I've broken that down into 18 different actions, really simple things again that people can do, from to incorporate into a sales meeting, to a strategy meeting, to a town hall. And it just starts with slowing down. So slowing down to challenge your thinking, organizing your attention, committing to actually make it that you are going to change your decision making. It's like a New Year's resolution. You either believe that you're at fault, or you're liable to fault, or you're not. And if you don't think you are, there's probably no point in doing any of these, because you're never going to do them anyway. It's just about interrupting mindsets. And I've tried to suggest something called decision friction. And decision friction is just a way to slow down. And it can be a series of prompts. It can be a series of nudges. It can be a series of little rules or questions that you ask. Or you can use any of these techniques, for example, the 5 whys. I mean, I quite like that one because it's so simple. Toyota uses it all the time.
Talk us through the 5 whys then, Nuala.
Well, Toyota uses it for manufacturing. So they have, they call it the 5 whys. And you ask yourself 5 times, why? And each time you're going down to a different level of detail. And I've just applied it to decisions here because I think, well, it's the same principle, isn't it? That you can do it. So if you ask yourself 5 times, well, why am I doing this? And why are you doing that? And why? And you keep going on whatever your question is. you get to a very, very different answer at number 5 than you do to number 1. And Toyota believes that if you dig down to that level of granularity, you basically are much further down the road to understanding and avoiding a human problem, but you start with a business problem. So you start with a business problem of why are customers, not getting their cars serviced quickly enough, for example. And then you just keep going, well, why and why and why and why. So it's almost like a journey mapping, but you're just going much deeper into potential reasons. So rather than the logical reason is, well, they don't have time, or it's this or the other, you get to a different level of granularity, and you usually uncover behavioral reasons rather than just, functional reasons.
Are there any other practical steps that we could use?
I said there are 18 there. The other ones I like a stupid one called WAIT, WAIT. I'm Irish, I talk a lot, and it's called Why Am I Talking? So it helps you. So, and then I actually have another one that's like, why am I not listening, which is whale. So wait and whale. I did think about wait in the book. So they're very, very easy, but it does start with, then there are other ones, like more in-depth ones. The other thing that I really like are implementation intentions, which is basically, we all know we want to, let's say, get fit on January the 1st. What are you going to do? People use this in voting, by the way, and it's made a material difference to voting outcomes. And it's called an implementation intention. You decide when you're going to do whatever it is you want to do. And you write it down, or you say, well, I'm going to vote, and the person will say, well, when are you going to vote? Well, I'm going to vote on Tuesday. How are you going to get there? Well, I'm going to get the bus, or I'm going to drive. And how will you get back? Well, I'm going to get a lift back, or whatever. And you basically decide the time, the place, the logistics, all of these reasons as to how you're going to do whatever it is you want to do. It can be clean the attic, Tim. It can be write a book. It can be whatever. But it's an intention. And because there's something called consistency bias, when you say out loud, so you've got commitment bias, you say it out loud, and consistency bias that you say, well, I'm going to clean the attic or clear the attic. You basically have this intention, and you are more likely to stay and to do that action because you have mentally committed to do it. And these are just psychological little hacks that get people to do things that either they don't want to do or things that you want them to do. And so these tools are fantastic. And understanding how these insights work and how these biases work, either to derail you or to help your career or your teams and these team dynamics, you can use either to work either as a preventative measure or as something to persuade or influence other people to do different things.
I think the slow down one is something that I use a lot. If I'm putting out a blog on where are we today? If I put a blog out on Tuesday, I would have written it on Friday, so the working day, so to give me time to think about it before, rather than doing it the day before and then rushing it and putting it out and it not being right. And I just slowed myself right down to just give me time to think about it.
And it's interesting that you say that, because there have been studies done that show that every second of reflection improves your judgment, even 3-4 seconds. And there's somebody called Mary Budd Rowe who did this even with with students and school children. So teachers tend to jump in with the answer, but when they paused even for a couple of seconds and allowed the children to answer whatever it was the question was, that the quality of answers significantly improved the more time that they gave them. So, and they've also done this for doctors as well. So when doctors use their intuition, there's a 10% accuracy. But when doctors use intuition plus checking, check after the fact, the diagnosis accuracy improved to 40%. So it's not just nice to have and hey, a fluffy area. It really does make a considerable difference, to people's lives. And as I said in the beginning, when you hold power as a decision maker, or you have responsibility for other people's lives, I think it's your moral responsibility to really pay more attention to this and to get it right.
Nuala, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your book. Tune in. What others hear, what others don't. How to make smarter decisions in a noisy world. So if I was going to buy one, where can I get one from?
Amazon is probably the easiest for people.
Excellent. And where can people find more information about you?
Go to my website, nualagwalsh.com.
or we can get you on LinkedIn.
Or the LinkedIn.
Excellent. Nuala, thank you so much for coming on. I love the book. It's better than Thinking Fast and Slow, which I thought was a rubbish
Thank you
book.
very much, Tim.
I think it's one of the worst books ever written. Sorry about that. But I'm amazed when it appears on lists. It's so dull. But at least you can hear how Nuala's how she talks. It comes across in the book, and it's an engaging sort of read. Anyway, thank you.